I still remember every detail of that day. The way the chandelier lights shimmered across the ballroom, the clink of glasses, the hum of laughter, and the feeling of being dressed up but utterly out of place. My brother Charles was getting married, and our family had spared no expense on the venue. His fiancée's family owned a sprawling mansion on the Gold Coast, just north of Chicago, and for one afternoon, it seemed as though every important person in the city had come to celebrate. The house was grand and old, with sweeping staircases, gilded mirrors, and ceilings so high they made you feel small, even in your finest dress. I'd spent weeks worrying about the wedding, but nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. I wore a green silk dress that I had saved up for, something elegant but modest. My husband James and I arrived a little early, our invitation in hand, my heart fluttering with nerves. He was quiet, but supportive, his hand always ready to steady me. As we walked in, my mother barely acknowledged us. She was too busy showing off her new pearl necklace and charming Charles's soon-to-be in-laws. For a while, I tried to blend in. I smiled at old family friends, complimented the bride's dress, and even danced once with my uncle. But under all the glitter, I could feel the distance, like there was a line drawn through the room that I wasn't supposed to cross. James did his best to keep the mood light, but he could feel it too. The laughter seemed to die down when we approached, and I heard whispers that stung more than I cared to admit. She married a farmer. Can you imagine? She could have had any life she wanted in the city. I heard it all, and it took every ounce of strength not to let it show. Then, just as the ceremony was ending and the music swelled, Charles made his way across the ballroom. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair just so, but his eyes were cold. He stopped a few feet from me and didn't bother lowering his voice. "Charlotte," he said, with a hardness I'd never heard before, "I don't want you here. You married a poor farmer, and now we have no relationship." The words landed like a slap. For a moment, I thought he must be joking. Charles, my brother who once taught me how to ride a bike, who had defended me in schoolyard fights, was now looking at me as if I were a stranger. James squeezed my hand, trying to calm me, but my mind was spinning. I looked around for help. Surely someone would step in, call out Charles for being cruel. But instead, my mother stepped forward. "Now stay alone, poor lady," she snickered, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. There was no kindness in her eyes, only something sharp and mean. My father stood next to her, silent, but the way he shook his head said enough. In that instant, I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. How quickly a family can become a room full of strangers. The humiliation washed over me in waves. I wanted to defend James, to shout that our life was good, even if it wasn't rich in the way they measured wealth. But the words caught in my throat. I felt utterly exposed. My dreams, my marriage, my very worth, reduced to a punchline at a party. The room suddenly felt twice as loud, the music too bright, the faces around me blurred with judgment. I gathered what little dignity I had left. James slipped his arm around my shoulders and led me quietly toward the door. My father looked away, as if embarrassed to witness my walk of shame. No one followed us. No one even tried to stop us. As we stepped out onto the marble steps, I turned back one last time. The house glowed with laughter and music, and I realized with a strange sense of relief that I no longer belonged there. The drive back to Kentucky felt endless. The city lights of Chicago faded in the rearview mirror, giving way to the dark stretch of highway, then the rolling fields I had come to love. James reached for my hand, not saying a word, just letting me cry. I stared out the window, letting the tears come, letting them wash away the ache of being abandoned by people I thought would always stand by me. I thought of every birthday, every Christmas, every family dinner, where I'd felt a little less seen, a little less important since marrying James. Tonight was just the final act in a play that had started long ago. We reached our home outside Louisville long after midnight. The house wasn't grand, but it was ours. White clapboard siding, a wide porch, a swing that creaked in the summer wind. As James parked the truck, I looked at him, his face tired but gentle, and knew that whatever the world thought, I'd chosen right. He wrapped his arms around me, and for the first time all night, I felt safe. Inside, I made tea while James tended to the horses. The farm was silent except for the soft nickering in the barn. I stood at the window, watching him work, remembering how everyone had underestimated him, how they never saw his strength, his kindness, or the clever way he ran our business. They called him just a farmer, but they didn't know the truth about what we were building together. As I sat at the kitchen table, the shame from earlier began to fade. My family had closed their door, but our life was open, wide, and waiting. They thought I had nothing. They were wrong. The city had turned its back on me. But here, in this quiet Kentucky night, I could see our future stretching out before us, full of hope, hard work, and the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars alone. That night, as I finally drifted off to sleep beside James, I realized that sometimes being thrown out is just the beginning of something bigger. My family had no idea what we were building, but one day, the world would. If anyone had seen our house from the road, they would have called it a farmhouse and nothing more. Just a white house with faded blue shutters, a few acres of pasture, and a weathered red barn that leaned a little in the wind. But for me, it was a world all its own. A place where laughter echoed across the fields, and every morning felt like the start of something big. James always said the house was lucky, that it had watched over generations of dreams, but I knew our luck was made, not given. Every inch of it was hard-earned. After the wedding fiasco in Chicago, it felt as if our little world drew even closer around us. We spent those first weeks barely leaving the property, pouring all our hurt and hope into work. Some nights I would wake up, panic clutching my chest, remembering my brother's words, my parents' laughter. But James always knew how to steady me. "Let them laugh, Charlotte," he'd say, pulling me close. "They don't see what we see." And he was right. They never saw the magic in his hands, the way he could calm a wild foal with nothing but a soft voice and patience. James was no ordinary farmer, and the farm wasn't just a business. It was his calling. The land had been in his family for decades, but it was his vision that transformed it. While most people thought of horses as work animals or hobbies for the rich, James saw possibilities in every stride and muscle. He knew how to spot a champion, not just by pedigree, but by heart. I still remember the first horse we bought together. She was nothing much to look at, skinny, nervous, with a coat dulled by neglect. But James saw something in her, and after a year of gentle training, she sold at auction for more than we'd paid for a house. That was the beginning of Riverbend Stables. The name was James's idea, inspired by the gentle curve of the river that marked our property's edge. It started small, a couple of stalls, a rundown trailer, just the two of us doing everything. But we worked as a team, side by side before the sun came up, mucking stalls and feeding horses, learning how to talk to buyers and read the market. My hands grew calloused, my back ached, and there were days I thought I'd never get the mud out from under my nails. But I found a strange pride in it. For the first time in my life, every hour of work built something real, something ours. Our clients started as local, small-time trainers, families looking for a gentle gelding, and the occasional show rider from Lexington. But word spread fast. People liked how James treated the horses, never rushing them or pushing too hard. Buyers started calling from further away, drawn by stories of the farm where horses go to become legends. We made sure every deal was honest, every promise kept. I handled the books, answered the calls, and learned the ins and outs of the business with a hunger I didn't know I had. In those early years, every dollar mattered. We saved ruthlessly, ate simply, and poured every profit back into the business, fixing fences, upgrading stalls, building an indoor arena so we could train even through Kentucky's brutal winters. Sometimes we'd collapse on the porch after a 14-hour day, too tired to speak, just watching the stars blink on above the fields. I think those nights bonded us more than anything else ever could. Eventually, the buyers from the East Coast started to notice us. The real turning point came when a trainer from Virginia bought a filly from us, and she went on to win at Saratoga. After that, everything changed. Our phone rang constantly, calls from New York, Texas, California. We shipped horses across America and then, to my amazement, across the Atlantic. The first time we loaded a colt bound for Paris, I cried, not just for pride, but for all the people who had ever doubted us. But the deal that changed everything came one autumn afternoon when Maxwell Harrington's assistant called out of the blue. At first, I thought it was a prank. Why would a billionaire from New York want to meet two nobody farmers in Kentucky? But Maxwell was serious. He had heard about us from a European buyer, and he wanted to see for himself what we could offer. I remember being so nervous the night before he arrived that I barely slept, pacing the kitchen while James pretended to read the paper. Maxwell arrived in a black SUV, flanked by two bodyguards. He wore a suit so expensive I was afraid to get too close. But as soon as he stepped inside our barn, something changed. He asked questions, smart, thoughtful ones, and listened carefully to James's answers. He wanted to see everything: the horses, the training routines, our breeding records. By the end of the tour, he was smiling. "You two are the real deal," he said, shaking James's hand in a gesture that felt more genuine than any I'd ever seen at my family's parties. We sat down in our kitchen with coffee and homemade pie and talked numbers. I still remember the way my hands trembled as Maxwell offered us a deal worth more money than I'd ever imagined. He wanted exclusive rights to our top horses for racing and resale in both America and Europe. The figures he mentioned made my head spin: hundreds of thousands of dollars per horse, and a partnership that could take Riverbend stables to heights we'd never dreamed of. When he left, James and I just stood there in stunned silence. The deal was finalized with a single handshake in the barn, the smell of hay and horses filling the air. "Charlotte," Maxwell said, looking me in the eye, "you and James are the best in the business. I'm buying every horse you can sell me." As the sun set over the fields, painting the sky gold and lavender, I realized just how far we'd come. We weren't the outcasts anymore. Our farm wasn't just a refuge. It was a powerhouse, built from scratch by two people who refused to give up on each other. I thought of my family in Chicago, still measuring success by what kind of car you drove or how many zeros were in your bank account. I wondered what they would say if they could see us now. The truth was, they never saw the magic. But I did, and I always would. It's strange how quickly a quiet life can become unrecognizable. For years, James and I had lived by our rhythms. Early mornings, late nights, our conversations punctuated by the sound of horses nickering and the gentle hush of the Kentucky wind. But all it took was one story on the local news to turn our world upside down. It happened on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. I'd just come in from the barn, my boots caked with mud, when I noticed my phone flashing with missed calls and messages. I frowned, thinking maybe something had happened with one of the horses, but as I scrolled, I realized something was different. There were messages from numbers I didn't recognize, emails from reporters, and even a few voicemails from local banks. I was confused, almost alarmed, until James called me over to the living room. "Turn on Channel 4, he said, his voice tight with excitement. I did as he asked, barely able to catch my breath as our faces filled the television screen. There we were, James and I, standing in front of the barn, shaking hands with Maxwell Harrington. The headline at the bottom read, "Small-town couple closes multi-million-dollar horse deal with New York billionaire." I could hardly believe it. I sat down, clutching the remote in disbelief as the news anchor described us as one of America's most successful horse trading families, a story of hard work, vision, and a little bit of Kentucky luck. They showed footage of our horses running free across the pasture, of James working with a colt, of me leading a mare by her halter, smiling at the camera. It was surreal. Our everyday life, beamed out for the world to see. Almost instantly, the calls began to pour in. First, it was the local paper, then a business magazine out of New York. By that evening, I'd heard from buyers in Dallas, trainers in Los Angeles, even a prestigious equestrian group in London. One woman, an agent with a clipped British accent, invited me to come to London for a conference on women in business. "You're an inspiration, Charlotte," she told me. "We'd love to have you speak." I felt dizzy, as if I'd been swept into a different world, one where my story actually mattered. The news spread fast in Louisville. At the feed store, people whispered my name, sometimes even coming up to congratulate me, their eyes shining with a mix of pride and awe. The woman at the bakery slipped an extra muffin into my bag, smiling as if she were in on some wonderful secret. Even the bank manager, who once looked at me with skepticism when I'd asked for a small business loan, now greeted me with a handshake and a business card. "If you ever need anything, just call me," he said, suddenly eager to be helpful. But nothing compared to the moment my phone rang and I saw my mother's name flash on the screen. For a long time, I just stared at it, my heart pounding. I hadn't heard from her in years. Not since the wedding, when her laughter had stung more than any insult. I hesitated, almost not answering, but finally, curiosity won out. I pressed accept, bracing myself. "Charlotte, darling." Her voice was syrupy sweet, as if we'd spoken yesterday. "We just saw you on the news. We're so proud of you." She went on, her words tumbling out. How she always knew I'd do something special, how everyone in Chicago was talking about us. It was almost comical, the way she pretended our past didn't exist, that her cruel words at the wedding were just some forgotten moment. I listened, biting back the urge to remind her of everything, to make her feel what I'd felt. But I didn't. I just let her talk, feeling strangely detached. A few hours later, Charles messaged me. His words were short and to the point. "Sis, maybe you can help me with some investments?" No apology, no mention of what he'd said or done. Just a simple request, as if asking me for a cup of sugar. I laughed out loud, shaking my head at the absurdity. The brother, who'd once told me we had no relationship, was now hoping for my advice, my expertise. I thought about responding with a witty remark, but instead, I put down the phone and went outside. The farm was quiet, a soft mist settling over the fields. I stood by the fence, watching our horses graze, their coats shining even in the dim light. James joined me, his arms slipping easily around my shoulders. "Busy day?" he asked, the corners of his mouth twitching with a smile. "You could say that," I replied, resting my head against him. I told him about the calls, the interviews, and the invitation to London. He listened, nodding, his pride in me unmistakable. "Who would have thought?" I whispered. "The girl nobody believed in, the poor lady, now getting calls from billionaires and invitations to speak in Europe." James squeezed my hand. "I always believed in you, Charlotte. And that's all that ever mattered." His words settled deep inside me, grounding me as the world spun faster around us. It would have been easy to let it all go to my head, to believe that the money, the recognition, the sudden respect from people who once dismissed me were proof of my worth. But I knew better. I remembered the nights of hard work, the tears I shed after the wedding, the way we'd built everything with nothing but grit and faith. As the days passed, our business soared. Deals came in from across America, buyers from Texas, California, and Florida, all eager to work with us. Our horses were winning races, our names spreading far beyond Kentucky. I traveled to conferences, spoke to groups of women who wanted to start their businesses, and every time I told my story, I felt a little stronger. But what mattered most was what happened at home. Our life, our love, the way we faced the world together. I realized something important. Sometimes, the world writes you off, but it doesn't know your story. Only you can decide what's possible, and only you get to write your ending. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the fields in gold, I knew that my story was just beginning. It's strange how a single moment can echo for years, how something as small as a few careless words at a wedding can push you onto a path you never expected. Sometimes I wake up in the soft dawn light, the scent of hay drifting in from the fields, and I can hardly believe how far I've come from that day in Chicago when my family turned their backs on me. Every morning, I stand at the window of our Kentucky farmhouse and let myself feel it, the gratitude, the peace, and yes, the quiet pride that comes with building a life on your terms. Our house, once dismissed by everyone as just a farm, has become something else entirely. Now it is the heart of a business that reaches far beyond anything I could have imagined when James and I first started. The place is always humming with energy, stable hands laughing as they muck out stalls, buyers arriving from Dallas, Atlanta, even as far away as Paris and London, their luxury cars rolling up the gravel drive. I remember the first time a visitor from France arrived, stepping out in polished boots, his eyes widening at the sight of our Kentucky bluegrass and the fine horses grazing under the early sun. That was the day one of our colts, born right here in the barn, raised with love and patience, was sold for $500,000 to a racing stable near Chantilly. The news traveled fast. Within weeks, buyers from all over America and Europe were calling, eager to work with the little farm with the big heart, as the papers like to say. Every win, every headline, every handshake that closed another deal, I celebrated not with champagne and caviar, but with James at the kitchen table, our fingers entwined over mugs of coffee. The world might have seen us as overnight successes, but we knew the truth. It was years of grit, muddy boots, and late nights that built our empire. Even when the money started rolling in, we never lost sight of who we were or how we'd started. We bought a second home in Colorado, a sprawling ranch nestled against the Rockies, all paid in cash, over $2 million. Sometimes, when I walk through its sunlit rooms, I remember those lean years when every dollar was counted, and I feel such a rush of gratitude that it nearly brings me to tears. It's not just about the money, though. For me, the real wealth is in the life James and I have created together. We have become a team, partners in every sense. Some mornings, he'll leave a wildflower on my pillow, picked fresh from the field, a simple reminder of the quiet love that has carried us through everything. Other days, I'll surprise him with a new saddle or a homemade pie, a small thank you for the way he never let me give up. Our days are busy, sometimes overwhelming, but at night, when the farm is quiet and the horses are fed, we sit on the porch together and watch the stars blink on, talking about dreams and plans and all the things we still want to do. We've hosted buyers and trainers from across the globe, forging friendships over shared meals and stories told around bonfires. More than once, I've found myself speaking at conferences, standing on stage in cities like Denver and New York, telling my story to women who felt as lost and underestimated as I once did. It still amazes me, the power of a single voice, the way your pain can become someone else's inspiration. At those moments, I always think back to that wedding, the sting of my mother's laughter, the cold dismissal in my brother's eyes. I thought those things would break me, but in truth, they set me free. Forgiveness came slowly, but it came. As the years passed, the bitterness faded. My parents called sometimes, less often now, but their tone was softer, less certain, as if they finally saw the daughter they'd never understood. Charles tried, awkwardly, to reconnect, offering small talk and stilted apologies, usually paired with requests for business advice. I let him in, but only on my terms. There is power in choosing who gets your kindness, and I decided that the best revenge was not coldness, but a life so full and rich that forgiveness became easy. And so, I don't feel angry anymore, not about that day, not about the years of loneliness or struggle. If anything, I feel grateful. Being pushed away showed me just how strong I am, and how much love can achieve when the world thinks you're nothing. Every time I see a new foal take its first shaky steps, every time James and I close another deal, every time I look around at the home and the family we've built, I know that being underestimated was my greatest gift. It forced me to build my worth from the ground up, brick by brick, hoof by hoof. Now, when people ask for my story, I tell it simply, I am the woman who was told she would fail, who was laughed at by the people who should have stood by her, who chose love over money and found both. I am proof that the world doesn't get to decide your value. You do. Sometimes the greatest revenge is living your truth, loud, proud, and richer than you ever dreamed. If you're reading this, if you ever find yourself standing alone, laughed at by the people you thought loved you most, remember my story. Let yourself feel the pain, but don't let it stop you. Let it push you to work harder, love deeper, and dream bigger. The world may try to define you, but only you get to write your ending. And trust me, when you choose your happiness, There's nothing more powerful in the world. So here's to new chapters, to the morning sun on fresh hay, to wild horses running free, to second chances and unexpected triumphs. My story isn't finished, not by a long shot. But as I look out at the fields, at James beside me, at the life we've built with nothing but faith in each other, I know that I am finally, truly home.